The dark story of Ibrahim Babangida begins long before he rose to power. It begins in the dusty town of Minna in Niger State in 1941, where he was born into a humble Muslim family. Nobody looking at that small boy in the 1940s would have guessed he would later become one of the most powerful and controversial leaders in Nigeria's history. He attended primary school in Minna and later Government College Bida, where his brilliance and determination stood out. Yet, like many young men of his generation, he was relentless and searching for a path that would give him influence and respect. So, when the opportunity to join the Nigerian army presented itself in 1962, he grabbed it with both hands. This decision changed everything because the military in Nigeria was not just a profession, it was the gateway to power, wealth, and influence. And Babangida was quick to understand that the barracks were not only about training and discipline, but about survival in an environment filled with suspicion, betrayal, and ambition. He trained in Nigeria and abroad, absorbing military skills, discipline, and strategies that would later serve him not only on the battlefield, but in the political chessboard of Nigeria, and very soon he found himself caught in the storm of coups and counter-coups that shook Nigeria in the 1960s. First in January 1966, when young majors overthrew the civilian government of Tafawa Balewa, killing top politicians and officers in civilian government of Tafawa Balewa. Then in July 1966, when northern officers retaliated, killing General Agui Ironsi and bringing General Yakubu Gowon to power. The atmosphere was bloody, ethnic tensions were high, and Babangida, as a young officer, witnessed firsthand how power could change overnight with violence. By 1967, Nigeria was in full-blown civil war, as the eastern region under Colonel Ojoku declared Biafra, and Babangida fought on the federal side. He was on the battlefield, risking his life, building a reputation as a fearless soldier in 1969. He was even shot in the leg but survived. The injury never stopped him. Instead, it gave him a certain aura of sacrifice and courage. Many began to see him as a loyal and dependable officer. The civil war ended in 1970 with Biafra defeated. But for Babangida and many like him, the war was only training for the greater battles of power that were to come. For Nigeria had entered a new era of military dominance, and Babangida was determined not to be left behind. In 1976, when General Murtala Mohammed was assassinated in an attempted coup, Babangida's courage was tested again. He drove into danger to confront the coup plotters and helped rescue General Olusegun Obasanjo, who then assumed leadership. This act of bravery elevated his status among the top ranks of the military, showing that he was not only ambitious but also daring in times of crisis. Over the years, he maneuvered carefully, aligning himself with the right people, building loyalty among junior officers, and cultivating a reputation as a strategist, charming and disarming, always smiling, yes, always plotting. Soon, he was described as the Maradona of Nigerian politics, a man who could dribble anyone and escape even the tightest corner. By the early 1980s, Nigeria was back under civilian rule after the handover to Shehu Shagari in 1979. But corruption and economic decline plagued the Second Republic, and in December 1983, the military struck again, led by Major General Muhammadu Buhari, who toppled Shagari's government. Buhari's regime was strict, uncompromising, and authoritarian. He introduced the war against indiscipline, clamped down on corruption, jailed politicians, and forced Nigerians into queues with soldiers, whipping those who broke the rules. At first, some Nigerians welcomed it, but soon the hunger, hardship, and depression made the regime unpopular. And in the background, Ibrahim Babangida, then Chief of Army Staff, was watching and waiting. On August 27, 1985, he struck, leading a bloodless coup that removed Buhari. And when he addressed Nigerians that morning, he came with a smile, promising a government with a human face, a departure from Buhari's harshness. He said his regime would listen, would consult, would be flexible, and Nigerians breathed a sigh of relief, thinking perhaps the soldier would be different. But little did they know that behind the smile was the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in the nation's history. From 1985 to 1993, Babangida ruled Nigeria with a combination of cunning and charm, but also with deception and manipulation. He introduced the Structural Adjustment Program in 1986, telling Nigerians it was the only way to survive the economy. But the reality was a disaster. The Nigeria was devalued. The naira was devalued, industries collapsed, salaries could not keep up with inflation, jobs disappeared, subsidies on essential goods were removed, hunger spread across the land. Students protested, workers went on strike, families that once lived comfortably fell into poverty. Many Nigerians still remember SAP as the program that turned their lives upside down, a single policy that wiped out hope and dignity. But Babangida's allies, contractors, and inner circle grew richer. The gap between the elite and ordinary people widened, and corruption flourished under his watch. Yet he continued to present himself as a man of the people, building his hilltop mansion in Minna, a palace-like residence that symbolized both his power and his disconnect from the masses. He hosted politicians, businessmen, and foreign dignitaries there, pulling strings like a kingmaker. Politically, he dribbled the nation endlessly, promising a return to democracy, creating elaborate transition programs, setting up the political bureau in 1986 to design a democratic framework, creating two government-approved political parties in 1989, the Social Democratic Party and the National Republican Convention.
Banning and unbanning politicians, setting election dates and shifting them. Year after year, Nigerians waited, believing his promise that he would hand over to civilians, yet each time he found an excuse to delay. He was the master of political time wasting, keeping the country in suspense, controlling every move like a grand puppeteer. Still, Nigerians kept faith until June 12, 1993, when finally, after 8 years of promises, Nigerians went to the polls in what became the freest and fairest election in the nation's history. Moshood Abiola, a wealthy businessman loved by the poor, campaigned on unity and prosperity, and Nigerians from all regions, tribes, and religions voted massively for him. The results were clear. Abiola had won, and for the first time in a long time hope returned to Nigeria, but Babangida dashed it in one stroke when he annulled the election, claiming there were irregularities, a decision that shocked the nation and the world. It was as if he had stolen democracy itself from the people. Millions poured into the streets protesting, demanding their mandate be respected. Clashes broke out, lives were lost. The international community condemned the annulment, but Babangida stood firm, dribbling again, trying to form an interim government headed by Ernest Shonkan, pretending he had stepped aside but still pulling strings from behind. Yet this time his tricks backfired. The anger was too much, and the interim government soon collapsed, paving the way for General Sani Abacha to seize power, beginning another dark era of military rule. By then Babangida's name was already stained beyond repair. For Nigerians, he was the smiling general who brought hunger through SAP, who enriched himself and his cronies, who dribbled the nation with endless false promises, who destroyed the fairest election in their history, who betrayed the hopes of millions. And even though he left office, his influence lingered like a shadow over Nigerian politics. Behind the scenes, Babangida was linked to several dark incidents, mysterious deaths and disappearances of journalists, activists, and soldiers who opposed him. Critics whispered about Deli Jiwa, the journalist who was killed by a parcel bomb in 1986 after publishing exposés on corruption and drug deals involving top officials. Many fingers pointed to the regime, though it was never proven. The case remains one of the most chilling unsolved murders in Nigerian history, a warning to anyone who dared to challenge the smiling general. There were also accusations that he and his allies siphoned billions of dollars from the oil boom of the late 1980s, using secret accounts and shell companies, money that vanished while hospitals rotted, roads decayed, and schools collapsed, allegations that Babangida always denied but could never fully shake off, fueling the perception that he was not just a manipulator of politics but also a master of looting. His personal life carried its own ironies. His wife Ibrahim Babangida became famous for her Better Life for Rural Women program, championing women's empowerment and rural development. She was elegant, glamorous, and popular. Her style captured headlines, but for critics it was just another way to distract from the regime's failures, a public relations mask over deep wounds. When Ibrahim died of cancer in 2009, Babangida lost a partner who had softened his image, and since then he has lived more quietly, occasionally granting interviews, smiling as always, defending his choices, insisting he annulled June 12 to prevent chaos, claiming Nigerians misunderstood him, but his words rarely convince, for the wounds of his rule remain raw. In the years after leaving power, he tried to play the role of elder statesman, hosting politicians in his Mina mansion, offering advice, influencing behind the scenes, even attempting a comeback in 2011 when he briefly sought the presidency again before withdrawing. But Nigerians never forgot. They always remembered the hunger, the corruption, the annulment, the dashed hopes, and many could not forgive. To them he remains the man who stole their democracy. Ibrahim Babangida's story is a cautionary tale of how charm without conscience can ruin a nation, how intelligence without integrity can destroy millions of lives, how one man's ambition can derail an entire country, from the dusty streets of Minna to the bloody battlefield of the Civil War, from the smoky coup plot of Lagos to the luxurious halls of the Hilltop Mansion. His journey is one of power gained and power abused. And though he is old now, living quietly, perhaps reflecting on the past, his legacy is written in pain, hunger, and betrayal. Nigerians will always remember June 12th, they will always remember SAP, they will always remember the Maradona who dribbled them until the final whistle, they will always tell their children of a man who smiled while the country bled, and that is why the dark story of Ibrahim Babangida will never be forgotten, because it is not just his story, it is the story of Nigeria's lost years, of dreams aborted, of democracy denied, of corruption entrenched, and of a people betrayed by the man they once trusted to lead them into light but who instead led them into shadows, a reminder for generations to come that power in the hands of the wrong man can turn hope into despair and a nation into a playground for personal ambition.